Welcome to Mining Over Canada. Join the Canadian Securities Exchange and our partners in a first-hand look into our country's vast mining landscape.
Welcome to Mining Over Canada, brought to you by the Canadian Securities Exchange. This is week 4, and we are highlighting the Northern Territories. Today, we're having a little bit of a different conversation. I am talking to Scott Sheldon and Jaap Verbaas. Scott is the CEO of a company called, actually 2 companies. Scott and Jaap are both involved with 2 companies based out of the Yukon. One is GO Metals, listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange, and the other is Flow Metals, listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange. Both are in different areas of the Yukon, totally different terrain, totally different sites, but welcome to Mining Over Canada, gentlemen. How are you guys?
Really good, thanks. Thanks for having us.
Great. Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today. This is going to be excellent. Obviously we're covering the Northern Territories. You guys are focused on 2 companies in that region. So Scott, why don't I start with you? Why don't you give us a little bit of an intro to GO Metals, and then I'll switch over to Jaap, and Jaap can give us an intro to Flow Metals. All
right, sounds good. We'll try not to confuse the two. They tend to sound the same when you say them out, but GO and Flow. But I'll start with GO. That's kind of the original company that we had that we started back in 2011, and it was Gorilla Minerals back in the day, and it used to be a gold company. We proved up a property that was in Western Yukon, and we basically proved that up for over 4 or 5 years, and we ended up selling that gold asset to K2 of the Discovery Group. And then we moved into battery metals, and we ended up picking up an interesting play just north of Dawson in the Ogilvy Mountains, and it's an IOCG prospect. So that's pretty exciting. It's big copper, cobalt, and there's a little bit of gold and silver in there as well.
I was just about to ask you to break down IOCG for anybody watching that might not know. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. Jaap's probably the best one to break down the IOCGs. He basically wrote his thesis on it.
Well, that would be copper, gold.
Iron oxide, copper, gold.
Yeah. Iron oxide, copper, gold. So Jaap, what about Flow Metals?
Yeah, sure. Flow Metals is essentially the result of us separating our gold business from the battery metals. And so the Flow Metals was formed in, I believe, 2018. We held it private until earlier this year. And we have an asset in BC that was separated from GO Metals. We then acquired 2 other assets, one in Yukon and one in Quebec. And the one in Yukon is the Sixtymile project. We've just extended the land package there. It's a claim that's it covers 3 creeks that are currently being placer mined. So there's coarse gold draining from the creeks. It's pretty exciting. And thanks to that, the infrastructure is great. We're just 2 hours west of Dawson. We work with the placer miners on site, and we just did our inaugural drilling campaign there, which was completed 2 weeks ago. And our preliminary results, chemical results, indicate that we had about 5 gold hits during that drilling. So that's pretty exciting.
Interesting. So GO Metals, Scott, is the Yukon, and it's the Monster copper gold project. And then Flow Metals is Sixtymile in Yukon. Let's talk a little bit of the history of the region. Talk to us about the Yukon. Why is it so important, and why have people been flocking to that region for
100 years?
More than 100 years. So talk to us a little bit about that. What draws people to this area?
Well, it's definitely a mining environment. Both of our companies kind of based out of Dawson, and that in itself is a well-known historical mining town. Great little town, and there's a lot of infrastructure for mining companies based out of there. Even local governments, we get great incentives working in the Yukon. There's no shortage of people who want to help us out in the field as well. So it's a great environment. We love working there. We recently joined the YMA as well, Yukon Mining Alliance, and that's kind of a good group of the top miners in the province. And so basically when we go to conferences or events, we'll kind of move in as a group, and it gives us great opportunities to speak with panels and what have you. But, so yeah, no, it's a great environment.
Yeah, Invest Yukon and Yukon Mining Alliance definitely are very proactive when it comes to their region and going out there and talking to the community about companies in that region. I actually did an interview with Ann Turner to talk about some of the initiatives. Obviously, they finished the virtual site tour recently. Were you guys involved in that?
Kind of indirectly. We had our site tour last year. So we actually had people flying over the Monster.
So obviously, it's a historic region. We've already talked about a little bit about that. People have been flocking to this area looking for natural resources, specifically gold, for for over a century. So what brought you guys to this area?
If I kick this off, Scott?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Yeah. So I guess we've both been separately working in the Yukon for before I got started with GO Metals, but the Yukon is a place where it's easy to work in terms of the infrastructure. There's large swaths of land that haven't quite seen the exploration yet that you see in southern Canada, and on top of that, it's just the history of mining there mining is in everybody's in the back of everybody's mind there. So it's a great place to work just for that. There's also the amount of people in the Yukon allow for us to you really get to know everybody that's involved. And so when we work in the Yukon, we as with the 60-mile, we work with the placer miners on site. When we are working the Monster claim, we are usually in touch with an outfitter that we've been able to use his camp for exploration. And so these kind of things they're so beneficial in the Yukon. And so it's a joy to work in the province or territory with everybody there.
Yeah. Why don't we actually break down a little bit into your background? Yeah, what's your background and how did you get involved in the mining sector?
So my I did an undergrad and master's in the Netherlands, and I wasn't too interested in working in the oil industry, and so I ended up leaving and left for Australia. I worked on a variety of projects there, and after that, I was looking for a place to do a PhD thesis in an area like the Yukon, so somewhere where it's somewhat farther from the beaten path, because that is where you can still find exciting things. And my thesis was on the rocks that GO Metals is exploring for copper and cobalt, the Wernicke breccia north of Dawson. And so that's upon finishing, essentially, it was a very easy step for me to go from that academic side to starting to explore these rocks in a different way. And yeah, but the Yukon had been on my radar for a long time before that.
It had been calling you subconsciously.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right.
Scott, what about you? How did you get into the mining space?
Well, my dad was in the business back in the day, in the 90s. He was involved with a few different junior miners. So I ended up, he basically sent me up to the Golden Triangle when I was 15 to work with some geologists up there. And so I ended up carrying rocks around for geologists in the mountains. I ended up doing that basically all the summers when I was going through university, just to help pay my way. And that kind of got me in. After that, I basically went into high tech, and I started offering web services to a lot of the junior companies that I'd worked with. And then kind of came full circle and ended up starting what's GO Metals today with my dad about 10 years ago.
So Scott, my question to you is, as a 15-year-old, when most kids are worried about video games, girls, hanging out with their friends and socializing, what drove you into the bush and the mining? Obviously, supporting your father and being out there with him. But what interested you as a 15-year-old to go out there and flipping rocks?
It was kind of a big adventure. We got to see a lot of places that people haven't been. Basically flying around with a helicopter every day. It was a pretty big rush, but so I basically got to see all over Canada with Yukon, the territories, Quebec, Alberta. But yeah, no, it's been a pretty good blessing.
Great. Well, we'll get into all of this in a little bit. I kind of want to stay on topic when we're talking about, you know, your flagship project for GO Metals, which is the Monster project, and then Flow Metals, the 60-mile project. Has there been historical work done on both these properties?
Yeah, so the I'll start with the Monster. The Monster was initially or there were some copper and cobalt occurrences discovered there in the 70s already, and this was, I think, 2 years of prospecting, and then after the IOCG deposit class was defined in the 90s, there was basically the next rush into that area, and this was, you know, it was more prospecting, some geophysics, etc. The first drill hole on the property was drilled in 2003, and so they're really, for an area this size and for the kind of samples that we're getting at the surface, the kind of mineralization we're finding at surface, there has been very, very little drilling, and that hole didn't intersect mineralization, and we think we know why. And so that's basically what we started with. And then we went back in 2 years ago with additional prospecting, mapping, geophysics, and we just completed our first drilling campaign at the Monster ourselves.
Got it. So what would one expect when they were able, what would one expect if they were to come onto your site? Obviously, we're doing this virtually. It would have been great for us to come out there actually to the site and take some video footage and talk to you guys while we're there. But what can an average person expect when they come onto each of these sites? I imagine both of them are quite opposite of each other.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know who wants to take one or the other, but I'll let you guys jump into it. Tell me a little bit about the sites.
Well, I'll take the Monster because it kind of reminds me of my first project when I was 15, working in the Golden Triangle. It's pretty rugged terrain, especially for the Yukon. It's helicopter access only. Pretty jagged peaks, pretty magnificent structures, and yeah, no, it's a pretty neat area. But you're out there. The drill crew that was out there this summer, we had a night shift and a day shift, and they had some amazing northern lights up there over the night times, and great panoramas in the daytime. But so it's yeah, pretty neat area.
So with a terrain like that, Scott, would it be fair to say that when you guys are out there, you know, a lot of sites will be like, well, we go out to the site, we do our work, and then we fly back to Dawson, or we fly back to one of the closer towns and set up camp. What's camp like at Monster?
Yeah, it was kind of up in the air what we were going to do right up into the end. It was a little bit of a rush program, as we were we basically had the season kind of working against us. So we had the choice of either being on site or basing out of Dawson. In the end, we kind of went with the easier choice of basing out of Dawson. But if we're going to do a longer drill program next year, we'd probably like to have a base on site. Last year, we actually, Dan Reynolds, who's one of the outfitters in the area, he's got a camp which is about 8 to 10 kilometers away from the project, and he was nice enough to let us use that as a base last year. So that's another option going forward as well. It's a grizzly camp though, so you kind of have the grizzly scratches on the trees, and it's pretty rugged.
I guess it's a regular occurrence to have run-ins with grizzlies out there because you're competing for space.
That's right.
Out there, tense. What about 60-mile, Jaap? Is it rugged terrain like Monster, or is it totally?
Yeah, it's not nearly as rugged as the Monster. It's it's below the tree line, and so it's not the kind of alpine terrain you get on Monster. And additionally, of course, because there are active placer operations on the 60-mile project, you can drive there with a simple car. And actually, important point, our drill was driven in by a semi truck, and it left the drill right next to the first collar location. So you can basically drive a semi truck right onto where we drilled this year, which is just phenomenal. It's the ease of access, it really helps there. And what we also did, it just again proving that the access and the heavy equipment on site really does make life a little easier, is we ended up trenching about I think just over 200 meters, and there's a 20-ton hoe on site that can excavate trenches for us. And it took, whereas it took, I think, less than an hour to dig out the first trench of 100 meters. So that's sort of the kind of thing that you can expect when you drive up to the 60-mile. You'll find placer camps, you find equipment. You actually also find old equipment, but there's some structures on site that have been there, I think, since the 30s. So in that sense, it's almost like a little mining museum. And these things, it shows that there's been an interest in the gold there for a long time. And we're pretty determined to find it in the bedrock.
Absolutely. So 2 projects, 2 totally different terrains. What sort of technologies are you guys using? Obviously most people, or the general public, I should say, the general person, when they think about mining, they probably are still thinking about the old days with picks and shovels and, a big deep hole in the ground. But mining practices, specifically the technologies that are being utilized, have come a long ways since those days. So can you talk to us a little bit about some of the new technology that's being utilized, specifically when it comes to exploration stages, and what are you guys using?
Yeah. So as a junior, that's basically one of the places we can add value. So we can take a project that was worked in the past, and then we can add a new technology to it as well. But I'll let you kind of add to that.
Sure. Yeah. So there's two really particular things that I'd like to mention here. One is for GO Metals. One of the ways that IOCGs are commonly explored is with gravity, and gravity is quite hard to do in rugged terrain. And it's the advent of drone technology and being able to make very highly detailed terrain models that allows us to get good gravity data now. So that's one way in which we've really been able to explore the Monster effectively, is by using geophysics that we just wouldn't have been able to use before, or not to the same degree. And then going on to 60-mile, which is, I think we had a pretty interesting approach this year, in that we really targeted as we drilled. And so the first probably 5 drill collars were in the location that I had wanted them and planned them before we went on site. And after that, we used the data that we got immediately from those drill holes. So data collected through XRF, which is chemical data, and data collected through an OTV system, which is a system that takes imagery of the core. And that data comes back within a couple of days, and you can use it to target your next drill holes. And this is the way that we really ended up zoning in on a very prospective area with only a 15-hole program. So it's that's sort of where that new technology is leading us now. It's the immediate return of data to the geologist in the field, so that we can actively target as we drill.
Yeah. Something that a lot of people might not know is something that you had mentioned to me, Scott, when we spoke the other day. You guys have are planning on using artificial intelligence for surveys at your Monster project. So how is AI being utilized in the mining space?
Yeah, I guess we had a pretty good partnership established with Windfall Geotech out of Quebec. And and we ended up partnering with them on a project out in Quebec as well. They're kind of one of the pioneers in the space, and yeah, so it's the rocks out in Monster. We talked about how that could be a good target, so that's definitely something we're looking at going forward. The way I look at the technology, it's kind of basically just looking with patterns. So you sandwich different layers of data together. So you'll start with kind of a surface layer, looking at the rock geochemistry. Then you'll take possibly a magnetic survey, and then maybe a structural diagram, and then you kind of sandwich them together, and then the computer looks for patterns in those new maps. So that's the layman's take on it, but yeah, you might want to add.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, it's correct. I think we use several data sets and add them together, and get the computer to look at every single pixel in that data, and it can do that in a way that the geologist might not always be able to do. So what we've noted for the Monster, for example, is that the correlation, or the way that the mineralization relates to the geophysics is complicated. And that's why we think that this AI, particularly on this project, can really help. And the other reason, of course, is that it's a relatively cheap piece of office work, which the alternative is doing these kind of things on the ground without the help of computers, and because the Monster is a little harder to access, it makes sense to utilize these methods while we're in the off season. Yeah.
I guess you using tools like AI makes rugged terrain more accessible for you guys as well, then.
For sure, yeah, totally. That's totally it, and it's that's also the reason why we've done a lot of satellite work on the Monster. We do a lot of remote sensing, and those things really help us focus our attention when we are in the field. Yeah.
Got it. So I want to switch topics a little bit. Obviously being in Yukon, the Dawson area, you guys probably rely heavily on community involvement and working closely with not only just the indigenous groups, but the locals as well that might be in the area. So Scott, how are you guys working with these two projects closely with the indigenous communities and the locals?
Yeah, well, working with we were on White River First Nation territory for the Wells project when we first came to the Yukon. So we were working. Janet Vandermeer from White River, she was doing a lot of engagement work with us too. She was very proactive, and we ended up being the first company in the Yukon to do a full agreement on a Class 1 exploration license. So that was good pioneering. Now we're in the Tronic-Wet'suwet'en First Nation territory for both of our projects, for GO and for Flow. So that makes it pretty easy. They've recently been recognized by the Yukon Geoscience as being a leader in the mining industry as well, for their work on coffee and with Gold Corp. So we're a little more of a small player for them, but we definitely make sure that we reach out to them anytime that we're working, and we keep them updated on our progress as well. But also working with people from the Yukon on our projects, like for our drill program, we were working with Vision Quest, a local First Nations group, and Capital Helicopters. It just makes sense to work with people in the area. It's an easy way to keep them involved as well. And I guess for Flow, we also worked with Ground Truth, who's another local outfit as well.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's a great way to give back and encourage them to, participate in the mining space, help the company grow. Jaap, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think Scott summed it up well. We do, we like working with people that are around our projects, and it really helps to have people that know the effects of the season change when you're doing a program, especially when like our drilling, we managed to drill, and we were lucky with the weather, but it was mid-October when we demobed, and of course having people on site that realize what that means in the Yukon, is very beneficial for us, and it's, yeah, as you say, it's a way that we automatically let people know what we're doing. If we have some business that we can give to a local First Nation company, then we're always happy to do that. Yeah.
And Scott, what is the outlook? What is one thing that you guys would help the industry as a whole grow in the Yukon when it comes from the governmental side? So whether it's, local, federal, provincial governments, what one thing that can be implemented that would, give you guys 10 steps ahead?
Yeah, I guess just clear engagement processes. I know there's a big, they've got the Dawson regional mining plan that's going on right now. That'll add a lot of clarity going forward.
Can you maybe talk to us a little bit about what that plan is? Because there's probably a lot of people that don't know. You don't have to get into a lot of the details, but just maybe even a summary of what that plan is.
It's being defined now. So that'll be a good tool going forward once that's been ironed out. But yeah, kind of clarity like that, that always helps.
And what about, like, let's say the economic development department of the Yukon and their group?
Okay.
Are you guys working closely with them?
Well, we apply for there's something called the YMEP grant. That's the Yukon Mining, used to be incentive program, and now it's an engagement, or I can't remember what the E stands for, but we apply for it every year, and we usually get it. It's a great way that the government helps the junior miners and the placer miners. I believe they have access to it as well, but it's a relatively small grant, but it's really helped us out in the past. So yeah, we love that aspect.
Got it. I'm gonna change things up a little bit here. Yeah. So you've been in the field all across the world. I think you said Netherlands, Australia, and then kind of drew you to the Yukon. This being mining over Canada, why don't you tell us one of your memorable moments in the field as a young, when you had first started? What kind
Okay. Well, that's an interesting one. I guess, of course, when I came here, I wasn't quite prepared for the amount of wilderness that you people in Canada have. And so being dropped off, I was in 2012, I was dropped off with my professor by helicopter in on my first field site. And I believe that, the helicopter left, we tried to find a place to pitch a tent, and we found wolf tracks, moose tracks, bear tracks, grizzly bears. It was quite something. We don't really have a lot of dangerous animals in the Netherlands, so that's those kind of things you have to get used to in the field in Yukon.
Sleepless nights to get.
Yeah, certainly a little less restful at the start. Yeah, but I guess you get used to the idea.
And what about you, Scott?
Well, I guess remembering back in the 90s when I was working in the Northwest Territories. We had, I guess it was mostly tundra, kind of really easy terrain. And that morning we'd flown over a herd of muskox. And at that point, I didn't even know muskox existed. So it was kind of this intro to this new beast that roams the tundra. And anyway, so we got dropped off at this project. We were in hip waders because we were kind of doing till samples. And we finished early, and just me and the geologist were sitting, kind of eating our lunch, and we noticed that this herd was kind of way off in the distance. They're a few kilometers off. So I had this urge to go join the herd. So I basically took off my hip waders, and I told the geologist to pick me up in the helicopter. And I was just curious, right? It was this new animal that kind of came into existence. So I basically jogged across the tundra barefoot. And I hung out with this herd for 20 minutes before the helicopter came. But back at camp, speaking of dangerous animals, apparently muskox are fairly dangerous if you get too close. So the guys, they told me that after, obviously, but it worked out all right. But it was a pretty cool experience.
Interesting. So lots of wilderness and animal stories from that usually stick out. And I would imagine, having a run-in with a muskox wouldn't be so good. Your team probably is not so happy. They're probably sitting there biting their nails while you're hanging out with them. Gents, the theme of this whole initiative being mining over Canada, one of the goals is to educate our younger audience about the mining practices, specifically here in Canada, because, we all watch the news. We've seen the protests that happen, at PDAC and at numerous mining conferences that we attend, where people are up, sort of have their guard up against mining and what it's doing. Can you guys comment on what the mining practices are in Canada and why are they so different worldwide from different regions in the world, and what makes mining in Canada different than all of these other regions? Why is it not as bad as people think it is?
I think people tend to kind of forget the exploration process that really leads to the mineral discoveries. And so when a junior explorer goes into an area, there's really minimal disturbance. It's in the initial stages, it'll be a few geologists walking around and taking some rock samples, and then there are geophysical tools that we use that can be airborne or even ground geophysics. There's very limited disturbance in these methods. So it's all about preserving the environment until we know that there is a potential mineral discovery there. And when it comes to these discoveries, you kind of have to take an overview look at things, because of course we can't all be driving electric cars without cobalt, and we can't all be driving them without nickel. We need a lot of copper for all our electronic gadgets, etc. And for for gold has been a store of value for millennia, and so it's a part of our monetary system, even though the dollar has been unlinked from it essentially. But precious metals and metals in general, they all have a role to play, and we sort of need to be mindful of that, right? We all use them, and I think it's junior explorers like us, we really try not to do any harm to the environment. We just try to make commodities available to everybody else. And Canada is different from a lot of other countries in that the regulations are good, so that explorers are they're forced to comply with rules that will minimize that disturbance, and all stakeholders have a say in the process, right? Like in Yukon, there's the notification process for First Nations, etc. And so I think Canada's doing good work on that front. Yeah.
That's what we're used to too. Like all our projects are Canadian. We're a pure Canadian company. So these are the kind of frameworks that we're used to working with. For us, it's predictable. And we're basically being held to the highest standard in the world. So it's a good system. It works pretty well.
Absolutely. Canada has some of the best sustainable mining practices out there, and education, I think, is a big part of letting people know that, we're not just here to dig holes and leave them like that. There's a process that goes into it. This is an industry that's been around for millennia, and it's going to continue. But the only way we can keep it sustainable is by having these good practices, having like-minded individuals like yourself who are out there, coming up with new ways. The new technology that goes into this space, I think, plays a big part. I'm sure you gents would agree with that.
For sure. Yeah.
So what's next for you guys? Have just finished a drill program. Obviously, you're probably waiting for results from that. But what's next? What can people expect from your team at GO Metals and Flow Metals in 2021?
Yeah, well, we'd like to get back and kind of expand on some of the work that we've done this summer. We're definitely looking forward to results coming back. The labs are pretty chocker-blocked right now with everyone processing, but we should have an idea in the next few weeks. But yeah, for next year, I guess, Jaap, you can start spending
yeah.
money again.
Yeah, I mean, we're
our
looking forward to
relationship
drilling.
is Jaap likes to spend money. I like him not to spend money. So that's kind of that's our.
Yeah, Scott raises it and I spend it.
That's the kind of work. Well, as long as it's being spent and the shareholders are finding value in it, and you're meeting your milestones, that's the ultimate goal, right?
Yeah, well, and I think it's we had good drill programs this year on both GO Metals and Flow Metals projects, and we're looking forward to having bigger programs next year. And we certainly have the targets, and we're primed for it. I think we're ready. So now it's the next months are all about working up those targets with the data that we've collected, and then we'll go in big again next year.
Perfect. Well, I look forward to being able to chat with you gents again in the near future. Hopefully in the new year, once you guys get back in the field, we can jump back on either on camera virtually, or my wish would be in person. Usually we would be doing these interviews in person and talking to you guys. I want to end off actually not on this note, but speaking of virtual, how have you guys been coping with COVID? Is there a big effect on the communities and things like that in the Yukon? Or I would imagine that it's not as much as obviously the big cities.
Yeah, Yukon's actually been really good with their caseload. There's been very few cases in the Yukon, but of course we worry that it would be us bringing something in, right, when we come from BC to Yukon. But I mean of course we put just standard mitigation procedures in effect that also the government helps with. They make recommendations for people setting up camps, etc. I mean, I think we all kind of want to go back to in person, because it is certainly much easier to communicate with everyone in person. But at the same time, it hasn't. The big effect to us this year hasn't been the physical distancing, etc. It's more been just lockdowns at the start of the year that made everything uncertain for the field seasons.
Yeah, just trying to figure out how you're going to adjust your game plan.
We're lucky that. We're lucky that Yukon and BC decided kind of midsummer that they would share their border, so there wasn't a quarantine that was in place for those two provinces. So that made our work a lot easier.
Before we end off, gents, I'm going to give each of you a couple of minutes here. Why don't you, if you have a message to put out there to our audience on why Canada, why the Yukon, why mining, I'll leave that to you guys.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we're pure Canadian, as I mentioned before. For us, it's predictable. We're conflict free. Like you mentioned, we're held to a higher environmental standard, and we have some pretty exciting projects too. So there's lots available in Canada. It's a huge country, obviously, as you guys have been doing your tour across. But we think we've got something great in both companies.
Great. Jaap, anything to add to that?
Well, I think for the younger generation that may not be as aware of mining and what it is and does, I think it's important to just understand that we are held to high standards in this country, and in Yukon, we don't want to disturb the ground any more than we need to, but we also need to ensure that we have access to the technologies that we want to have in the future, and that access is not hampered by a lack of access to the minerals and elements that we need to mine. And so mining is really important for new clean technologies for the future. And I think it's really important to understand the big picture there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. So anybody watching, this has been a highlight of the Northern Territories as part of Mining Over Canada. Specifically, we've been highlighting the Yukon through talking to both Scott Sheldon and Jaap Verbaas, who are involved with GO Metals and Flow Metals, both listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange. So Scott and Jaap, anybody watching, if they have any interest in what you guys do, how can they keep up with you guys? Obviously online, social media, conferences. Why don't you talk to them and let them know where they can find out more about what your company does?
Sure. Yeah, our websites are flowmetals.com and gometals.ca. I've got a Twitter presence at Scott Metals. We'll be at the Yukon Geoscience coming up. That's in November. Then we usually do the 2 Vancouver conferences, the Roundup and Vancouver Resource Conference. And then we'll also have a presence probably through the Yukon Mining Alliance at PDAC in March. So those are good ways to kind of keep up with what's happening in the industry as a whole and with us. So we look forward to hearing from you.
Yep, I imagine most of these conferences coming up that Scott mentioned are all going to be virtual. I know the PDAC definitely is. So it definitely is more accessible. I encourage you to keep up with what these gents are doing with both their companies. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us about your companies, the region in the Yukon, and overall mining in Canada. We appreciate you guys and wish nothing but success to you and your teams.
Thanks, Anil. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Cheers.
Likewise, gents. Thank you so much for your time.